Once again, our top story tonight, the Trump administration announcing that it is pulling out troops in northern Syria today. President Trump defending the move, saying that he did not want to keep U.S. troops tied up in endless wars in the region. But both Republicans and Democrats are criticizing this move, saying that it exposes America's Kurdish allies to Turkish attacks. And there are conflicting reports that Turkey has apparently wasted no time in doing just that, in launching these attacks. This is a video that was posted on social media just a few hours ago, and it shows explosions from reported Turkish airstrikes on Kurdish territory in the region. But the United States Defense Department is denying those reports. It says that no attacks have begun on the Kurds so far. All right, let's get to our supersized expert panel. Joining me now, former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan, former Marine Gunnery Sergeant and Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Jessie Jane Duff, and Ryan Morrow, a National Security Analyst at the Clarion Project. Thank you all for being with us. John, I'd like to start with you. Some of the president's top supporters are pushing back against this move. Senator Lindsey Graham calling it a disaster in the making. John, is this move a disaster?
In one sense, it is. The Kurds have been America's staunchest ally in the region for a long, long time, and we cannot be perceived to be allowing them to be slaughtered at the hands of the Turks. We can't allow that because that sends a chilling message to other would-be allies in the region. America's real ability to protect the Kurds, however, is not 1,000 infantrymen. It is America's ability to essentially wreck the Turkish economy, which is already in dire straits now, with 14% unemployment projected to contract by 2.5% by the IMF this year, and inflation in the well into the double digits. So our leverage with Iran is not the 1,000 soldiers, it's the ability to inflict sanctions, and that is the protection for the Kurds, and that's the best protection we can really offer.
All right, so John, you're saying it's not a great move, but not a terrible move. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a disaster. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, literally just days ago, we were reading about raids with the U.S. personnel on the ground working with the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is led by the Kurds, in order to go after ISIS. So ISIS has not been completely defeated. We do need those Kurdish forces on the ground. If you want to take an effective non-interventionist policy, then the best you can do is to have your local allies like the Kurds empowered as boots on the ground so that the U.S. can be minimally involved while ensuring American national security. I would also add that I'm very surprised to not hear much commentary about the estimated 100,000 Christians that live in that Kurdish area and are now in imminent danger due to Turkish forces and jihadist forces backed by Turkey.
Several consequences, Ryan, including, as Senator Lindsey Graham has pointed out, Turkey and Iran getting close, and this only emboldening Erdogan. Jessie Jane, you're an ardent supporter of the president. You're on the Trump Campaign Advisory Board. You're part of the Women for Trump. Do you support the president on this one?
Absolutely, and this is why. The authorization to use military force was never granted by Congress to be in Syria. We were relying upon a law in 2014 that enabled us to have the president take any action against those that had caused 9/11 or their associates. At this point, are they still considered an imminent threat? Is ISIS still an imminent threat? We have been there based upon this original law, and at some point we have to get authorization from Congress to continue being in a foreign territory such as Syria. We're not involved in the Syrian civil war. We're supposedly there to just ensure that the decimation of ISIS. So now the rationale is, well, we're abandoning the Kurds. I don't think that that's a fair statement whatsoever. The Kurds knew that we would not be there indefinitely.
But Jessie,
they knew that we didn't have authorization to be there. Yes.
Jessie Jane, the Kurdish forces were key U.S. allies in defeating Islamic State in Turkey.
Of course.
Turkey considers them terrorists. They've made it quite clear. Erdogan calls them an existential threat. And the Kurds are seeing this as a major stab in the back by the U.S. How does this not send a message to our allies, and not just the Kurds, that the U.S. can't be trusted to have their back when they're confronted by an enemy that calls them an existential threat?
Okay, so first of all, we have spent 18 years in Afghanistan. I think the rest of the world knows that our forces have died on their soil for a very long time. I have friends and family members that know of people that have died. So to suggest that the United States is unreliable is a very unfair statement by many of the opponents. And with that, I understand. But we also said, your correspondent from Washington, D.C. clearly stated that only 50 people were being removed from that area to ensure that they were not attacked by Turkey. Turkey had warned us months ago, as on the show, we talked about it. We were supposed to have a safe zone that was established. I would suggest that the president isn't going to remove everybody and not remove all of his support for the Kurds. We can also support the Kurds many, many, many ways. They can have outside support with air support. They can have support with the arms. They can have support with machinery. There's many ways we can support the troops. But what are we looking at when it comes to American lives that are over there? Every single one of these pundits that goes on television and says that we're abandoning them, what about the Americans who lose their sons over there every single year? What about them?
Jesse,
and we have to at some point say, are we in an indefinite war?
And that is what the president is ultimately saying, it seems, it seems that he's weighing the lives of American troops over the lives of these Kurds. But Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on what this could actually mean for the Kurds, because as we're saying, reports that Turkey has already started this offensive, conflicting reports. But what could this mean for the Kurds?
Genocide is what it means. And pretty much every Kurd will disagree with the notion that this doesn't mean that the United States is abandoning them. You need to have people that fight terrorists on the ground, and if it's not going to be us, it's got to be locals like the Kurds. So arguing that this type of move is some type of anti-war gesture is actually not true, because the reality on the ground is that this is going to make war more likely. It's going to, over the long term, require even greater U.S. involvement. It also fulfills some of the end times prophecies that ISIS has said that they are going to fulfill, that they would suffer a series of defeats and then have a massive comeback. And when that happens, you are going to have a wave of recruitment, including recruitment that happens in the United States. So this is a direct threat to the United States. And I would also add that even just from a procedural standpoint, I'm not comfortable with the idea that Erdogan can just have a phone call with President Trump, and Erdogan supports the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, and he acts like the top advisor to the president on Syria. You should consult and listen to your American patriotic advisors over the words of an Islamist extremist like Erdogan.
John Jordan, the president says that Turkey is now going to assume responsibility for the 12,000 Islamic State fighters and about 58,000 women and children related to ISIS that are being held by the Kurdish forces in northeastern Syria. So what does this mean for ISIS? What do you expect Turkey to do with them now?
Well, they're going to be interned, of course. The Turks are going to move inside, and it looks like it's going to be, originally there was an agreement for a 14-kilometer deep safe zone, but now it looks like there's going to be 30 kilometers deep. The Turks have another problem, too. They have more Syrian refugees. In fact, they have more refugees than any other country on earth right now. Nearly 4 million Syrians that need to be resettled out of Turkey and back into Syria because the Turkish economy is fragile enough. Ultimately, the protection, the fate of the Kurds is going to be determined by how much the United States is willing to inflict economic pain on Turkey and how credibly Turkey takes those economic threats, and the threat that the United States might continue to arm and support the Kurds even after they've pulled back. So the question isn't about, they're not going into, they're going to push the Kurds to a 30-mile, outside of a 30-kilometer exclusion zone, but this isn't a license to go and hunt down and exterminate the Kurds. And the Turks understand this.
We would hope that the Turks understand this. Jessie Jane, the president, to John's point, has threatened to, and I'm quoting from his Twitter, destroy Turkey's economy if Turkey goes off limits after his decision. So, Jessie Jane, what would be considered off limits to the president?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to all agree that we're speculating about what the potential outcome will be. That's the first thing. Second thing, what are we looking at with the economy? This president is very, very direct about what he says. We know that he is collapsing the Iranian economy to a point where even outside interests, outside countries, I should say, are no longer able to even do business with Iran, or they will suffer consequences with the banking industry that they have, such as China. This would be essentially what Erdogan is going to face, that it would handicap and cripple him financially. I think that this president, when he said, again, your Washington correspondence, I will reinforce, said 50 will be moved out of the direct target of Turkey. We don't know the number that is being pulled out. Everyone is basically going crazy saying that all the Kurds are going to go under genocide. How can we speculate that when the president said, clearly stated, that he'd be willing to send people back in if needed? So let's just take a breath, because he has great advisors. He's going to ensure that he is keeping a campaign promise that was to get troops home. We did not receive authorization to even be in Syria. And if all these people want us to be there, then why hasn't Congress ever taken action to ensure that we're there by law? We're not. So the president's in a rock and a hard place also. When American troops die for other soil, then we have to know that Americans get tired and fatigued from this. It's an expensive cost to the American taxpayer, and our blood continues to spill on their soil.
All right, Ryan, to Jessie's point, the president has said that the U.S. has done more than its share and that it's time for others in the region to take greater responsibility. What's your response to that?
I read, I think, every single statement from President Trump on this, and none of them oppose a Turkish mission to attack the Syrian Democratic Forces. So I see no indication indicating that he'll oppose that. And if we are hopeful that he would use economic pressure to stop such a mission, why doesn't he do it now? I mean, why does this have to come about through a phone call from Erdogan to Trump and then the President of the United States saying, okay, we're going to get out of the way so that you can attack the Kurds? Erdogan has been very open about the fact that he equates the entire Syrian Democratic Forces with terrorists. So that does mean destroying the Kurds.
John Jordan, that's an excellent point that Ryan makes. Erdogan has not exactly proven himself to be a good U.S. ally so far, certainly cozying up to the Russians with the purchase of the S-400 missile defense system. Other acts that indicate that Erdogan is moving away from a congenial relationship with the U.S. at large, and this perhaps just emboldens Erdogan, sends him a message that he has better ties with the president than expected. What is in this for President Trump to bolster Erdogan like this?
Well, President Trump doesn't look at it so much as bolstering Erdogan as it is fulfilling a campaign promise to bring these troops home. The president takes this very seriously. It's a fundamental issue for him. He would like to work with Erdogan on a number of things to keep, as a counterbalance, hopefully, to Iran in the region, and to work with Turkey as an ally. One doesn't have to trust Erdogan as a human being or as a good person. One just has to be able to understand what his interests are and how he sees them. Erdogan is presiding over something of an unstable country with serious structural economic vulnerabilities that are easy for the United States to exploit. So one just has to trust that Erdogan doesn't want massive economic and political unrest to be able to work with him. I also wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of codicil or face-saving agreement that couldn't be made public, where the Turks are going to move in 30 kilometers. They're going to, for domestic purposes,
John,
Erdogan needs to look strong, but not take it too far.
John, in the 30 seconds we have left, though, economic pressure takes time to work. We're seeing that with Iran, that the sanctions, whilst having an impact, they don't work immediately. So what happens if the Turks go ahead with this and then we impose some kind of sanctions?
Okay, sanctions with Iran, it's a completely different animal. Turkey is far more integrated in the world economy and hasn't been ostracized from the United States for 40 years. Just because it's taking a long time with Iran, their economy is far more resistant to it. The Turkish economy is far more integrated, and said sanctions would have a far more immediate and pronounced effect. So you can't look at them as the same thing in terms of timetable for economic impact of sanctions, because they're not the same.
All right. Great discussion. Appreciate all of your perspectives and your expert analysis. Ryan Morrow, John Jordan, Jessie Jane Duff.